The reason I'm very uneasy about the world not being able to agree on what a man and woman is that I've been married for 21 years. It is by far the greatest joy of my life. And I'm talking, I've made a lot of fucking money. And I'm just here to tell you, as powerful as money is, it will not bring to your life what a
Amen.
thriving marriage will. Not in
Amen.
a million years. So my wife becomes predictable to me when I think of her in classic feminine ways. And she becomes unpredictable to me when I think she's like me. And at the beginning of our marriage, it was very confusing because I didn't think about it. So I just assumed that she was like me. So I did not have the consilience, is that the word, of knowledge at the time, and was blind to the fact that I didn't have that. And so there was so much friction. And a lot of that friction has worked out over time by literally spending research hours on what are the differences between men and women.
Right.
And as the two of us did that, we were like, oh my God, that's why you act like that. And it just became so much easier to deal with.
So there's a famous scene in King of Queens. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember that sitcom?
Never watched it, but I know it.
It's basically kind of this affable blue collar guy, Kevin James. He's married to Leah Remini.
Yes.
Is that the former Remini? Is that how you pronounce it?
Former Scientologist? I don't know.
That's
I
right.
think
Exactly.
that's how it said.
And they're having a fight because his she has a friend, or I don't know the exact details, but there's this chef. He's a portly fellow. He likes to eat a lot. There's this friend who's a chef who's cooking him all these meals. So he's chatting with her on the phone. She's cooking him meals at work, whatever it is. This is the friend. Leah
Whichever.
gets jealous, and they're now fighting about the fact that he says, "But I'm not having sex with her. I'm not being unfaithful to you," and she says, "Of course you are being unfaithful to me." So now they have a big fight as to what constitutes infidelity. Now let me bring evolutionary psychology into this, because as I watched that episode, I could literally link every word that's mentioned from the script writers to a fundamental evolutionary principle. I discussed this actually in my 2011 book, The Consuming Instinct. So there's great studies that show that men and women, to your point about understanding these differences, are equally romantically jealous. So it's not that men are more jealous than women or vice versa. But here's the evolutionary insight. The trigger is different for men and women. There are two types of infidelities. There's sexual infidelity and there is emotional infidelity. So if I bring in people into the lab, and by the way, the study that I'm describing was done by David Buss and his colleagues, who's a pioneer of evolutionary psychology and a good friend of mine, who actually wrote the preface of The Consuming Instinct. You bring in people into the lab and you actually put physiological measures on them so that you know that it's an autonomic response that you're measuring. It's not that they are, altering their answer for impression management or whatever. So you can do skin conductivity thing, you can do heart blood pressure. You can do there's all kinds of ways you can measure autonomic responses. And now I'm going to read you one of two vignettes about your partner, your husband or wife. Let's do both, irrespective of whether it's for a man or a woman. You're sitting right here in the lab, Tom. Your wife is having some really juicy sex with the super sexy Greek gardener. Mull that in your little head for a while. Now let's see the stress level. Or, hey Tom, so now this is the emotional infidelity. Hey Tom, your wife goes to lunch with her colleague, who's this really fun, affable guy. They joke around, they talk about their shared values. So it's emotional, absolutely no sex. Guess what happens to the difference between men and women? Men respond much more harshly when cued with sexual infidelity. Women respond much more harshly with emotional infidelity.
That's so crazy to me.
That is why I am the godfather. Okay. So now, why is that? What's the evolutionary reason? The greatest threat to a man's evolutionary interest is paternity uncertainty. Therefore, the thought of my wife going with another man, we're a biparental species. I don't like the idea of being cuckolded. Therefore, I've evolved the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral systems to really respond harshly to sexual territoriality infractions. On the other hand, for women, not that they are terribly pleased if you cheat on them sexually, but they're more displeased if you cheat on them emotionally, because that is a greater predictor. You mentioned earlier, I want to
Mm,
predict it. That is a greater predictor of the likelihood of your man packing his bags and leaving, either literally or metaphorically. Okay.
right.
And therefore, that's why, by the way, when a man often cheats on a woman and now he's trying to assuage her anger, what does he say? Whether,
It
right?
meant nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It meant nothing. I don't even remember her name. I'll never see her again. Why? Because he is assuaging the fact this is not a repeat thing. There's no chance there could ever be any emotional entanglement involved here. So, this gives you an example, number one, of the value of evolutionary psychology and the value of something as practical as why men and women so often speak in completely
Mm,
non-intersecting ways, because we're not using theory of mind with the other sex, right? So for example, when men send, if you forgive the term, dick pics to women,
yeah.
they are exactly engaging in a violation of theory of mind.
Yeah.
Because what are they doing? They're saying, I get titillated by visual stimuli. Therefore, it must be the case that women are titillated in exactly the same way. Guess what, Einstein? They're not.
Do you know how badly I want my wife to want me to send her dick pics? It's so, I feel dumb because I know that she doesn't, but I can't help wanting her to want me to do it. I know better, so I don't.
Okay.
But like, yeah, I get it. I get it.
So that, by the way, when I lecture to my university students about, first class, why am I going to teach this whole course using an evolutionary lens? I usually will come up with a few of these examples. Like, they're all young people that have boyfriends and girlfriends that where they get jealous, and so that's how I grip them, because I explain to them that it's not, understanding evolutionary theory is not some highfalutin scientific thing that is void of practical value.
Mm,
It allows me to understand why people want the corner big office. It allows me to understand. I always tell them, I guarantee you there'll be 3 4 people in this room that in the next 2 3 years will send me an email saying, oh, I just had a fight with my husband and wife, and it's exactly because of lecture 3 from your course. I remember you said about romantic.
mm,
So that, and I guess that speaks a bit to the next book that I might be writing, the power of evolutionary thinking.
mm.